Hey everybody, what's going on? Eric here. Hope you guys are all doing well out there. I'm doing just great. You know, I hate every time I do a video, the damn air conditioning turns on or the furnace turns on, whatever the time of the year it is. Yeah, I could never win. Anyways, if you guessed it, you guessed right. You're looking at Wally in a Box's custom Kramer guitar. Well, now custom Kramer. Didn't start off that way, but it is now. And she's going pretty damn good. The top has cured. The sides have cured. As you can see, I have the control cavity and the spring area for the Floyd Rose walled off, so it's not going to get any epoxy in those two areas. And you want to be really careful when you're doing your masking. You want to use good quality masking tape, something that is going to stick and something that will continue to stick as the epoxy heats up, as it cures. A lot of masking tapes will end up moving away or pulling away from the surface that they're stuck to because of the heat of the epoxy. And I should know this because I've used cheap masking tape before and had that problem. So today we're going to epoxy the back of this. So you see on the sides over here, I have what I call a drip skirt, which you would say, Eric, why didn't you put a drip skirt on the other side of the body for the back so you didn't have all those ugly drips that are on the bottom of the body that look like shit? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I didn't care. I'm not worried about the back as I am worried about the top. And the reason being is because all those little drip spots will blend in with the epoxy resin. And when I do my sanding for leveling and polishing, yeah, they will blend in and you won't even notice that they're there. That's the one thing I like about this epoxy resin. Well, actually two things. One thing, that it's not flammable, so you don't have to worry about using the torch on it and setting your project on fire. But I will say, you know, be careful around the masking tape, because the masking tape is kind of flammable. Now, I wouldn't say that the epoxy resin is like a lacquer, but it kind of acts like one. So when you apply another coat to it, you want the first coat to be cured to where you won't be able to push your fingernail into it or leave a mark, because if you apply another coat, that bottom layer will not cure correctly with another coat on top of it. So you want, if you're going to use a second coat, make sure that that top coat is cured. So when applying the second coat, you don't have to do any prepping. Just make sure that there's no dust or anything that's settled on the body, and you're able to apply a second coat of epoxy. The stuff is real sticky, and as it cures, it gets even more stickier. So it adheres to itself. The one thing that's kind of nice is it doesn't adhere to wax paper. It'll just peel right off of wax paper. But this countertop, yeah, it adhered to it so much that it was, even with a razor blade, it was a pain in the ass to get it off the countertop. And this surface is basically a smooth surface with no you know, sandpaper marks, you know, scratches in it from sandpaper. So you don't have to do too much prepping as far as applying, besides masking off the areas that you don't want epoxy resin to be in. So as far as all these drips go on the back, once I put on this coat, they'll blend in. They might still be a little bit on the high spots on those areas where those drips are, but once I sand them, do the sanding on this thing, which I am, they'll blend in and go away. You won't even notice that they're there. That's the one thing I like about it. Even if you do sand a painted surface, you don't notice that there are sanding scratches or a dullness in the finish when you apply the epoxy. It's just like adding a clear coat to something. But this is a very durable clear coat. So I'm going to start mixing some epoxy and getting ready to go over here and start getting this thing, next step, done, hopefully soon. So the body is going to cure up overnight. Tomorrow I'll end up checking everything out to see what it looks like as far as thickness goes. If it looks like it's got a nice thick coating on there, then I'll stop at that. I won't add another coat. But if it looks like it's on the thin side, I'll end up putting another coat on. You could tell by the way things look as far as depth goes in your finish. Regardless if there's any type of artwork or anything on there, you can still see and tell the depth of the finish underneath the epoxy. So right now, I want to answer a question that was a very good question. Instead of using a type of a torch to heat up the epoxy to remove the bubbles, what about using, say, a heat gun? Now, I have a heat gun. It's got 3 different stages on it, from low to high. And either way, it still has moving air going through it, which the epoxy kind of softens up even more with heat when it's still in the liquid stage. And if you add air behind that, you could risk blowing or causing some type of waves in the finish before it cures up. And even though it is self-leveling, adding the heat to it does loosen it up a little bit, but it also adds heat to the epoxy, and heat is what helps, as it's curing, cure. And you don't want to use a heat gun, because that moving air, regardless if it's on a high or low or distance from moving it away from what you're using it on, it could blow something into the finish, some type of dust or something. You could have a ripple effect in your finish, causes a lot more sanding, possibly adding more epoxy to your whatever you're working on. So I'd say no, that wouldn't be a good idea. The torch isn't that bad. Like I said, it's not. The box says that it's not flammable. I've seen other epoxies out there that also say the same thing, that they're not flammable, but they're not a 50-50 mix. You have either more resin, less hardener, or vice versa. So I kind of like this one with a 50-50 mix. There's no brainer. You just get a cup, put a mark on it on each cup that's level with each other. Pretty simple to do, and start filling it up to that line. Mix one into the other. Make sure you do part A into part B, because like I said, a little less resin is better than not having enough hardener. And start mixing. I kind of go over the recommended time for mixing, just to make sure that everything is mixed and mixed well before I apply the first coat or second coat to the project that I'm working on. So I would say kind of no on the heat gun. Getting that the torch works really well. The way the flame comes out of the torch, as you're moving pretty fast, there's no air behind it to spread out the epoxy that you've already laid. Yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah, you have to be careful of what you're doing with your surroundings. Make sure that there's nothing around it that could possibly, catch on fire. But the outcome of it is a hell of a lot better than anything else that I've seen, as far as what some people use to try to remove bubbles. Some people do a thing where they do it on like a very, very hot day, or there's another way that you can do it too. Take your bottles of resin and the hardener and put them in hot water. Okay, just set them in and like fill up your sink, put the bottles in the hot water, and that'll soften and loosen up the epoxy or the resin and the hardener to where it's more of a liquid than what kind of looks like a gel. It looks more like a liquid when you heat it up. That loosens it up, softens it up, and that also helps with removing bubbles from the epoxy itself. So when you do a pour, you won't have as many. Now, a lot of times when you squeegee this out and everything else, it kind of takes care of a lot of the bubbles, but just to make sure on the safe side, not sure side, but safe side, that you get all the bubbles out. Because if you do a sanding and say you break one of those bubbles, and you start doing your polishing and everything else, that the powder epoxy gets inside of those holes and you start seeing like white spots. And even when you do your polishing and buffing and everything else, the rubbing compounds will get inside of those holes as well, and again leave white spots that look ugly. So you want to avoid that. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you guys learned something, and don't be afraid of the epoxy resins. They're pretty cool, and there's a lot of stuff that you could do with it. I've seen people take a split a log in half, and that log had like dead spots or rot spots inside of it, and they filled it up with epoxy resin and made a really nice table out of that log, and all the characteristics of the wood and everything else just popped through the resin. So thanks again for watching. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and I will catch up with you all later.